Good day and welcome to Predators Proclivity, where we look at the data from the season for the NHL Nashville Predators and make comments upon it. I'm your host, Preston Proctor. Tonight's opponents are the Florida Panthers, 45-19-4, 21-10-2 at home. Tonight's game is in Florida. The Panthers are in second place in the Atlantic Division with 94 points, 3 points behind Boston with 2 games in hand. They are 7 points ahead of Toronto, even in games left. So this division looks like it'll come down to Boston and Florida for the division title. They are 7-3 in their last 10 games, but have lost their last 2, 4-0 at Carolina and 5-3 at home to Tampa Bay. In the loss to the Lightning, Tampa Bay got off to a 4-0 lead before Florida scored their 3 goals, pulling to within 1 with about 4 minutes left in the game. Tampa Bay then got an empty netter with 1:32 left. Carolina won 4-0. There you go. They scored 4 goals. Florida didn't. Prior to this 2-game losing streak, they won 2, lost 1, and then won 6 prior to that. Back in January, they had a 4-game losing streak, which is their longest of the season, and their only losing streak more than 2 games. This is the 4th game for them in a 10-game stretch where they are playing teams which are all currently in playoff positions, so it's a tough stretch for these guys. Next up for them will be the Rangers, Flyers, and the Bruins, whom they are in a dogfight with for the division lead. Coming up on the trade deadline, the Panthers made 3 trades. They traded a goaltender for a goaltender. They got Magnus Hellberg for Ludovic Weber from Pittsburgh. They traded with Buffalo to get forward Kyle Okposo, giving up defenseman Kale Sajalin, and with Ottawa getting forward Vladimir Tarasenko. All of those picks, they also gave up, all of those trades, they also gave up picks. With Pittsburgh, it was a conditional 7th round next year. With Ottawa, it was a conditional 4th round this year and a 3rd round next year. The trade with Buffalo, where they got Okposo, is a conditional pick for this year, a 7th round pick, but if they win the Stanley Cup, it turns into a 5th round pick. So that's what they did at the trade deadline. The Preds are 40-25-4 overall, 21-10-3 on the road. They beat the Sharks Tuesday, 8-2. McCarron was the only Pred to get 2 goals, so the goal scoring was pretty spread out. The Preds got 1 goal, the first goal of the game in the first, as did the Sharks, scored by ex-Predator Mikael Granlund, apparently playing in Nashville for the first time since being traded. San Jose went up 2-1 early in the second and then decided that enough was enough, and they went home. The Preds continued to play, adding 3 in the second and 4 more in the third. The Preds are 8-0-2 in their last 10 games, overtime losses to Montreal at home and Minnesota on the road. Since February 17th, 13-0-2. So they are on a pretty good run right now. It's hard to argue it could be better. I guess it could be 15-0, but tonight is the only game of this road trip. The Preds come home for 2 games against Detroit and Vegas. They are in the 4th place in the Central Division with 84 points. 9 points behind the tie of Winnipeg, Colorado, and Dallas. Winnipeg has 2 games in hand on Dallas and 1 on Colorado, so they are in the driver's seat in this division. Despite my prediction the other night, they beat the Rangers. So there you go. The Preds are in the number 1 wild card spot, 5 points ahead of Vegas, who has a game in hand. So their delta on Vegas is looking better and better. Vegas is trailing the Kings. I don't really see that to be all that interesting, because if they stay ahead of Vegas and Vegas overtakes the Kings, then they will by default overtake the Kings at the same time. So the Preds are 8 points ahead of the Wild, which is the next team looking to get into the wild card spot. The Wild's in the wild card spot. So the Preds are 8 points ahead of them, and they have a game in hand. St. Louis is next behind Minnesota, down to Minnesota by 1 point with a game in hand. Anaheim has now been eliminated from playoff consideration. Arizona is 18 points out of a playoff spot with 13 games left, thus meeting my criteria of saying they're done, dusted, and out. Seattle is 11 points out with 15 games left, and Calgary is 8 points out with 14 games left. So those are the next couple of teams that look like they are going to drop off the board. If we keep our eyes on making sure we stay ahead of Vegas, I think that's the best bet. Just keep winning. That's even better. 9 points behind Dallas and Colorado. It's looking, that being able to overtake those and be in one of the division spots just doesn't look very likely at this point. Tonight's matchup, it is the second and final game with Florida this year. They are 0-1 against the Panthers, losing 1-4 back in January at home. That wasn't as bad as it sounds. There were no goals scored in the first. The Panthers did score first, and that goal was in the second period. Nashville tied the game up less than a minute later. So at the end of the second, it was 1-1. The Preds were still in it. Then with about a minute into the third, Florida got a goal to go ahead, and then they got 2 empty net goals in the last minute and a half to end the scoring. So the Preds were pretty much in that game for the bulk of the time. So that's good, even though Florida does look pretty intimidating. The things to note, when we met Florida at that time, they had their 4-game losing streak. So the win against Nashville ended that 4-game losing streak. Interestingly enough, they're entering tonight's game on a 2-game losing streak. So I don't know what to think about that, since they haven't lost more than 2 games in a row, except for that one time. The Preds, when they've met Florida, were in a different state. They were pretty much in that funk where they had just lost to Arizona, and then after losing to Florida, they went on a 2-5 string, with one of those being the loss, or the last of those losses being 9-2 drubbing by Dallas. And since then, Nashville has turned it around. Good job, guys. The Panthers come into the game on a 2-game losing streak, and the Preds are on a 3-game winning streak. You got to play the games. Streaks begin, streaks end. It'd be nice to be 1-1 against the Panthers and take this win. They are Florida is on a difficult part of their schedule right now. They have the Rangers coming up later this week, so it's hard to say where the mindset is. Good on the Preds the other night for playing the Sharks, who are out of the playoffs and have been out of the playoffs since, the season started in October, so November. And they kept their heads up, even though they did get down 2-1. They came back, played really well, and kept their head in the game against an opponent where they easily could have checked out. So I think the Preds are in a good mind space. Be a fun game tonight. Really looking forward to seeing them beat Florida. Like I say, it'd be nice to be 1-1 against the team and not 0-2. So what are the Preds like on the road? They are 21-10-3 on the road. Pretty good. Since January 1st, a date that I randomly picked when I started doing this podcast because I didn't like the way they played in the first part of the season. They are 12-3-2 on the road. They are pretty even, oddly enough, on how they perform in each period. Again, this is whether they win or lose or tie the period, not to deal with the game. The first period, they're 14-9-11. The second period, 13-13-8. The third period, 12-11-11. And in overtime, 1-3-2. Shootouts, they're 2-0. So slightly more likely to win the first period, given 14-9-11. The second period is even money. On win-losing, tying, oddly enough, is significantly behind. Not quite half, but about that. Third period, I guess it's a coin flip on whether they win, lose, or tie. So there you go. When they get the first goal, gosh, I can't believe I keep talking about this, but it is pretty significant. When they get the first goal on the road, they are 17-3-1. 17-3-1. If they get it in the first period, 14-3-1, and if it happens in the second period, 3-0-0. If they don't get the first goal, they are 4-7-2. 3-6-2 in the first, 1-1 in the second. So it's really advantageous. It really skews things on the road if they get the first goal. If they don't, it doesn't look good, but it doesn't look good, 4-7-2, but 17-3-1 is significant. If they get the first goal on the road, it also improves their record for the first period to 13-2-6 from 14-9-11. And the second period stays pretty even at 8-6-7 from 13-13-8. Actually, it gets, if they get the first goal, if they get the first goal, it looks like the second period becomes a toss-up. I guess kind of a toss-up, 13-13-8, but toss-up in all three categories, 8-6-7. Getting the first goal, the third period becomes 8-4-9, which is pretty good, down from 12-11-11. So, getting the first goal not only gives them a good record with the wins, which is great, but also improves how they play in each period. It kind of makes sense on the third period because, if they got the first goal and they're leading, the other team could be, being a little bit more aggressive, pull their goaltender, that kind of thing. And so, it kind of becomes a little bit of a toss-up there too, I guess. But, they could get the empty netter, or being, 6-on-5, the other team could get a goal. The third period stats get a little wonky because of those dimensions. So actually, that would be another interesting stat to look into is records when they're tied going into the third period, or the deltas going into the third period, and what type of variance happens in the third period based upon those criteria. I'll have to remember to look into that. So if they win the first period, on the road, their record, win-losses, this is back to talking about wins, losses, not just the period. But if they win the first period, they're 11-2-1. If they win the first period, they're 11-2-1 overall, 3-5-1 if they lose the first period, 7-3-1 if they tie. So, if they tie or win the first period, that's 18-5-2. So that's what their record is. So that's pretty good. 3-5-1, having lost the first period. That still doesn't sound too bad, but you'd still like to see them recover a little bit more from not winning the first period. If they only win one period, they are 6-6. If they only lose one period, they're 9-2. So there you go. That's kind of interesting. If they only lose one period, 9-2. So it doesn't sound like it happens that often. 9-2 though, 6-6, 6-6. They win one period, they're 6-6. So toss up there. If they tie two periods on the road, they're 6-1. Again, looking at interesting stats, something like that just kind of stands out to me. So 7 times on the road. Again, that's still not a significant data point, but it's what we've got. They only play 41 games on the road during the regular season. So, it's trends. It's kind of all you look at statistically. The numbers for the overall season are, is it 20? Statistically, you need a data set of at least 20 to be statistically relevant, if I'm remembering my statistics correctly. Again, I guess this isn't a class on statistics. It's talking about the Preds. So if they tie two periods on the road, they're 6-1. If they win two periods, they're 15-0. And if they lose two periods, they're 0-8. So when is the winning goal scored? Typically, if the Preds win, 48% of the time, it's the third period. 10% in the first, 29% in the second. When they lose, the winning goal has never been in the first period. That's pretty good. I mean, the Preds, 10% of their wins, the winning goal was in the first period, but they've never been beaten, never gotten that. The other team has never gotten the winning goal in the first period. 54% of the time, it's in the second. And then 23% in the third and 23% in overtime. So that's pretty good if you can get through the second period. Again, as people listening to this podcast, the two things that I really found interesting was the announcers saying that the first goal was important, and it turns out the first goal is important, and probably even more important psychologically than just statistically. Psychologically, the people playing the games. Statistically, it's just me here sitting here in my studio chit-chatting. So it's more important in the game. So the other thing is that I felt like at home, the Preds didn't perform very well in the second period, and that also turned out to be true. They're better on the road than they are at home in the second period. However, if they get the on the road, 54% of the time, the winning goal, if they lose, is scored in the second period. So that's pretty significant. Overall, the winning goal is 35%, about 35% in the second period. So overall, when they lose, 35%, it's a second period, but on the road, 54. That's a significant gap. It's a significant delta there. The third period also is, I guess it was 36%. So, but around 35% for the second and third period, with 13% first and overtime. So that's the number. So what we want tonight on the road against the Florida Panthers, let's get a strong start. Let's get the first goal. We can tie the first period. Let's not lose it. Shouldn't lose the first period. Because that doesn't bode very well. And then try to tie the second period. So get the first goal, win the first period, tie the second period, and then try to win the third period. I don't know. I mean, anyway, yes, getting the first goal will be a good indication. If they get the first goal and they win the first period, it's going to be pretty good for the Preds. It'll be a good night for the Preds. So it looks like the trades they made have been starting to pay off. Florida's also made trades. So, it's going to be a tough game tonight. Hope it'll be a fun game and turn out with the Predators winning. So anyway, that's my wrap up on tonight's game. Thanks for listening. I'm Preston Proctor, and you've been listening to Predators Proclivity.